Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We start the chapter on biodiversity, and this, of course, we've had first two videos on it, and this is the third video, which is going to cover up the syllabus, which is 18.3. Now, 18.3 is all about conservation. Maintaining biodiversity is important for many reasons. Actions to maintain biodiversity must be taken at local, national, and global levels. It is important to conserve ecosystems as well as individual species. Now, in this, as you can see, there are many headings under it, which we're going to try and discuss each one separately and talk about it in a befitting manner. Now, the first one is discuss the threats to biodiversity. Now, if you look at the threats to biodiversity, the first thing that we see is what? Habitat loss and degradation of the environment. The second is climate change. The third is excessive use of fertilizers and industrial and domestic forms of pollution. So you always underline one word so that you remember it later on. Like here I would underline habitat loss. Here I would underline climate change. Then overexploitation and unsustainable use of resources. We mean keep on using it, but then we don't replace it. And so this is unsustainable use of resources. And of course, the last one is the most interesting one, which is the effects of invasive alien species. I mean, of course, we think of aliens as something weird, which are coming from the sky. But here we're going to talk about the alien species and how they're going to affect the native species. Like, when there's migration or when there is a new lot of people. I remember because I belong to Peshawar. So when the Afghan refugees came in from Afghanistan because of the war, so they were alien species. They're not alien species, but they were people who were not of the same province. And then how they then started to assimilate amongst the native people. So alien species on the native species. Native means the ones that have been living there. And then suddenly we get a new type of, maybe we had yellow and green parrots, and now we have another green and purple type of parrot which comes in from another country, and somebody maybe brings them in and they start to breed here. Now how they're going to affect the native population. So we will be talking about these five very important points. Number one, habitat loss. Number two, climate change. Number three, pollution. Number four, overexploitation. And number five, alien species. Now let's look at the first one. The destruction of the natural environment leads to habitat loss. The clearing of the land for agriculture, housing, transport, leisure facilities, industry removes vegetation. So we cut down trees because we're going to build a housing project there. Maybe we're going to build some sort of a leisure facility, a swimming pool, a gym, or we're going to set up some industry. So what is going to happen? Many species of plant and animals will lose their habitats completely. Or what will happen is that the habitats can be divided into small areas. And this is called habitat fragmentation. The word tells you the name, the habitat fragments. Habitat fragmentation. So the same forest, which was a huge forest, now because of a road going through it, or like the motorway is built, so it is divided into 2 or 3 different fragments, and that of course would cause there's a risk of extinction of the endemic species. Endemic means the ones which have been living there on that place for a long time. So deforestation has a devastating effect on the biodiversity of some countries, and this is mainly because all the trees are cut down, and vast tracts of forest will have to be cut down, and then of course there's a lot of habitat loss because all the birds and all the insects which lived off those trees are going to be lost. Then looking at overexploitation, an example is fishing, overfishing. Now fishing is just one example of overexploitation of resources. And another example is the removal by logging companies of valuable trees such as teak and mahogany at a rate faster than they can regenerate. So, although agriculture provides most of our food, we still rely on taking wild fish from the environment. It is very difficult to know whether fish stocks are sustainable, but the history of the fishing industry suggests that many species have been driven to near extinction by overfishing. Overfishing means that you use very fine meshed fishing nets and you actually remove the big fish and the small fish and the medium fish, but the small fish should not have been taken out because they're going to breed next year, and so the populations of these fish decrease, and that of course results in large species being lost and becoming extinct. The loss of one species, the sea otter, led to catastrophic loss of many other organisms like the sea otter that play a central role in an ecosystem, are known as keystone species. Keystone species, you can understand the word by the English that is being used, is that keystone species are those which of course play a very important role, and when we lose those, then the entire ecosystem is affected. So those are called the keystone species, and we need to be knowing this word, keystone species. Like the African bush elephant is a keystone species of the savanna grasslands of east and southern Africa. Bush elephants are very destructive of vegetation as they push over and eat many tree species. Now this extreme form of grazing helps to maintain this ecosystem, which is renowned for its diversity of large mammals as well as many other species. Elephant dung provides a rich habitat. It's almost an ecosystem for many organisms including fungi and dung beetles. So that is why we called elephant is called a keystone species, because a lot of other species depend on it in some way or the other. So keystone species. Next is pollution. Pollution is a major threat to many ecosystems. In many countries, industrial and domestic waste is processed to reduce its impact on the environment. For example, sewage is treated before it reaches aquatic ecosystems such as rivers and the sea. However, this does not happen everywhere, with the result that many ecosystems are polluted, often with substances that animals' bodies are unable to metabolize or excrete. Polychlorinated biphenyls, which are called PCBs, were used in various manufacturing processes. So waste from factories used to flow directly into rivers without any form of treatment. Even though PCBs are no longer used, the substance persists in the environment, has entered food chains. And this of course weakens the immune system and reduction in fertility in birds and mammals. And PCBs are causing the death of seals in the North Sea from a viral infection. Then non-biodegradable plastic is a major marine pollutant. Animals such as dolphins and turtles get caught in discarded fishing nets and die. Turtles eat the plastic bags, mistaking them for jellyfish. Now next we come on to the fertilizer. Now fertilizers that have not been absorbed by the crop plants drain into rivers and then into the sea. Fertilizers which have not been absorbed by the plants drain into the rivers and into the sea. The extra nutrients become unavailable to river and marine ecosystem. Now this causes the growth of algae. And you know algae is a unicellular plant. This often occurs faster than the herbivorous organisms such as fish can feed on them to keep their growth under control. Many of these algae produce toxic substances and their growth often unbalances food webs. And excess growth of algae has catastrophic effects on coral reefs and hugely reduces biodiversity. Next we come on to air pollution, and pollution of the air leads to problems for aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems. The combustion of fuel with a high sulfur content such as coal leads to high concentrations of sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere. This reacts with water vapor to fall as acid rain. Acid rain has destroyed vegetation, led to acidification of aquatic ecosystem in parts of the world downwind of highly industrialized areas. And few animals can survive or breed in waters of low pH. And many ecosystems are at risk from acid rain. And the next one is greenhouse gases. Now, industrialization and extraction and combustion of fossil fuels has led to an increase in the concentrations of number one, carbon dioxide, and number two, methane. Now, these are considered greenhouse gases because they reflect the hot air back onto the earth. So, the emissions of methane associated with cattle and rice farming and the breakdown under anaerobic conditions of organic waste in landfill sites. Now, the build-up of these greenhouse gases leading to climate change. Now, global warming is likely to produce changes in the distribution of terrestrial ecosystems. The acidification of the oceans may spell catastrophe for coral reefs and those species with as many mollusks that make their skeletons and shells from calcium carbonate. Global warming increases, there's going to be rise in sea levels. So the rise in sea levels associated with global warming will bring many problems. And some ecosystems will become even more restricted in their range than is currently the case, and some will become even more fragmented. Then the next problem will be the frequency of natural catastrophes such as hurricanes and typhoons and severe storms, and flooding is thought to be on the increase. Now this encourages growth of following typhoons in the Pacific. Flooding increases the concentration of nutrients in coastal waters, and this encourages growth of phytoplanktons which provide food for the larvae of the crown of thorns starfish. Now huge numbers of adults then eat the coral, and eventually the numbers of starfish decrease and the coral regrows. So if these population explosions happen every 10 years or so, the coral has time to recover. But if they are more frequent than this, then the coral reefs will not recover and they will also die. So these are the consequences of air pollution. Now the next heading is why does biodiversity matter? Why do we worried about this plant is going to become extinct, or this animal is going to become extinct, the white lion is going to be extinct? Why does biodiversity matter? Now the first and the most important heading which we talk about as a biologist is moral and ethical reasons. For many people, the loss of biodiversity is a simple moral or ethical issue. We share our planet with a huge range of other organisms and we have no right to drive them to extinction. And some people believe that humans have custody of the earth and should therefore value and protect the organisms that share the planet with us. Of course, I believe that we must leave the earth as we found it for the next generations, for our children, for our grandchildren. And we have a moral obligation not to cause so much pollution that, so many animals and plants are becoming extinct. And this is one of our moral and ethical obligations of life given to us on this earth. So moral and ethical reasons. So we must leave the earth as we found it and not result in the extinction of a large number of species. Number 2 is ecological reasons. Number 3 is aesthetic reasons. Number 4 is social and commercial reasons, and number 5 is other reasons. So the second one is ecological reasons. Now ecological reasons, one, you have to understand that every food chain is interlinked. So if the plant dies, the primary consumer dies, and then the secondary, and so on and so forth. We don't want that to happen. The higher the biodiversity of an ecosystem, the less likely it is to be unbalanced by changes in condition of threat such as pollution. We are part of many ecosystems and rely on them in many ways. And ecosystems are of direct value to humans. Many of the drugs that we use originate from living organisms. Antibiotics are isolated from fungi and bacteria. Anti-cancer drugs have been isolated from plants such as the Madagascan periwinkle. The Himalayan yew, which is also a source of paclitaxel, is threatened by over-harvesting for medicinal use and collection for fuel. And there's currently much interest in cataloging plants used in traditional Chinese and Indian medicine to see if they can provide drugs that can be mass produced. If we allow tropical forests with a great biodiversity to disappear, then we are undoubtedly losing species that could be beneficial to us. So we cannot just say, okay, well, if this plant dies, what does it matter? Because all food chains are interlinked. And if one plant dies, well, there are a lot of other microorganisms or even macroorganisms that live off those plants. And all those will die. And of course, this will affect the secondary consumer and then the tertiary consumer. So, ecological reasons, all food chains are interlinked, and then, of course, we have food webs. So, everything is very much, interlinked. Then we come to the third one, which is aesthetic reasons. Now, many people gain pleasure from studying or just appreciating the natural world, which continues to provide much inspiration for artists, photographers, poets, writers, and other creative people. So, nature is a source of great inspiration for the people with a creative mind. Also, the aesthetic reason is on one side, but of course, another factor is also that wildlife is a source of income for many countries, such as ecotourism. So, ecotourism, people visit those countries to visit those natural habitats and enjoy the beauty of it, and to look at, like in Africa, there are these safari parks, and countries such as Belize, Malaysia, Maldives, Costa Rica encourage tourists to visit their national parks. And this form of tourism provides employment and contributes to the economies of these nations. So, ecotourism. Now, the fourth point is social and commercial reasons. Now, our crop plants do not have as much genetic diversity as their wild relatives because it has been lost by selective breeding for uniform, high-yielding crops. Now, the wild relative of maize grow in the states of Oaxaca and Puebla in Mexico. They can provide the genetic resources we might need to widen the genetic diversity of cultivated maize if it is affected by diseases or by other catastrophes. A species of rice, Oryza, which grows wild in Mali in North Africa, is not suitable for cultivation as a crop plant because of its low yield and poor taste. However, it is resistant to a large number of different strains of the disease of rice known as bacterial blight. So that has been successfully interbred with the cultivated rice, O. sativa, to give varieties of rice with resistance to the disease. So if we have the wild ones and the native ones, and then we have the newly bred ones, well, we have a lot of genetic diversity, but we've lost the old ones. Then we've lost that biodiversity and we've lost all that genome. So we have to maintain for the commercial reasons as well. The International Potato Center in Peru has used the Andean species as a source of alleles for resistance. And then these alleles have been introduced in the crop species both by interbreeding and by gene technology. Now, another thing is the contribution of microorganisms, which are the source of many useful products, not least antibiotics. And the famous heat-stable enzyme Taq polymerase was discovered in a thermophilic bacterium from a hot spring in Yellowstone National Park in the USA. And then this enzyme, as you know, has been used in genetically modified bacteria for use in the polymerase chain reaction, which is called PCR. So there are likely to be many other such compounds, especially enzymes, that live in extreme conditions, not unlike those in some industrial processes. And the last one we come is to other services. Now, ecosystem provides services for us. Forests, peat bogs absorb carbon dioxide and may help to reduce the effect of increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Then the transpiration of plants contributes to the water cycling, providing us with drinking and irrigation water. Termites and ants, along with many species of fungi and bacteria, recycle elements such as carbon, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus. And without this, plant growth would slow and there would be less food available for organisms in other trophic levels. So these are the 5 reasons that we have why does biodiversity matter. Number 1, moral and ethical reasons, then ecological reasons, then aesthetic reasons, ecotourism, then social and commercial reasons that we need to have the wild variety, we need to have the genome, we might use it in genetic technology and put it in the crop plants so that they also become resistant to certain diseases which the older ones had. And then the other services is of course transpiration, water cycle, and the fact that many organisms will help to reduce the effect of increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So this is the second part of the syllabus, which says is the need to maintain biodiversity. Now we come to the topic of protecting endangered species. How can we protect endangered species, and what are endangered species? The definition of endangered species is the numbers that have become so low they cannot be maintained by the normal rates of reproduction. So endangered species, if you put an animal on endangered species, that means their numbers are so little that maybe in the next 5-10 years they will all get extinct. And the best way to conserve any species is to keep it in its natural habitat. Maintaining the natural habitat means that all the life support systems are provided. Now, in the public mind, conservation tends to concentrate on individual species or group of species. Now, high-profile programs have centered on mammals such as giant pandas and whales. Now, equally important is the protection of whole ecosystems threatened by development. Now, the first thing that we talk about is national parks. Then we talk about zoos, then we talk about assisted reproduction, and then we talk about the problems of successive conservation. Now, what are national parks? Now, many countries now set aside areas where wildlife and the environment have some form of protection and where the activities of humans are limited. So people cannot build houses, people cannot build factories, people cannot build roads. And conservation areas may be set up where there are strict limits on building, grazing farm animals, hunting, or other activities that might adversely affect animals and plants that live there. The world's first national park, the Yellowstone National Park in the USA, was set up in 1872, and it is the last remaining nearly intact ecosystem of the northern temperate climate zone and serves as both a recreational and a conservation area. So national parks, every country would have different. Pakistan has different national parks. They have, I think, about 7 national parks. And you need to Google it and have a look at it, which are the national parks of Pakistan. And these are, of course, designated areas where we will allow the plants and the animals to survive. And they, of course, will not become extinct, and people can visit them, and then there will be a managing team who looks after it and looks after the animals and looks after the plants and the birds. So national parks. Another point about national parks is that there are restrictions on human activities in national parks. Tourism brings in money to pay for the maintenance of the parks and also helps to inform people about how conservation takes place. And this raises awareness of important issues and can elicit support from the public. And this works best if local people are involved in some way, so they feel that the park is theirs and can obtain benefits from it. This may allowing them to use some areas of the park for herding their animals or growing crops, employing them as wardens or rangers, or using some of the money raised from tourism to improve the local health or education facilities. So this is all what I think is enough for you to know about the national parks. With that, we end this video and we'll continue it on another video so that we can go on to the video 4 of this chapter. And thank you for now.